A little over a year ago, I was living in an apartment, trying to save money. It was a small one-bedroom apartment, and the rent was somewhat manageable. At the time, I wasn't dating, and I surely wasn't looking to date. I was happy going to my 9-to-5 job and then coming home to relax with some video games. The apartment building itself was alright. It was nothing to write home about. Everything on the inside worked, and for the most part, the tenants were quiet and kept to themselves. The one downfall for me was the view from my balcony. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion, but I wanted the third-floor apartment so I could sit outside and read or just simply take in the fresh air. So the fact that I had another apartment building in my direct line of sight was kind of a buzzkill for me. I ended up making peace with it after a while and learned how to ignore it. It's strange how the separation of a building makes a huge difference. For example, my apartment building was just a little nicer and had very little, if any, type of crime. The apartment building behind me always seemed to have a police car outside, and the area itself spanned multiple blocks and I think 6 or 7 different apartment buildings. When I say buildings, I mean different apartments altogether. Like each block of apartments was a different leasing company. The first few were really nice, and the more you progressed through the blocks of apartments, the less nice they became. I was in the last building before they started to go downhill. But like I said, I got used to my view, and every once in a while I would get to see a show better than you could watch on Cops. At some point during the lease of my apartment, I had come home from a hard day's work and just wanted to sit outside and relax. It was one of those beautiful nights in the early summer, and I didn't want to go outside. I grabbed my laptop and started watching stuff on there with my headphones. Before I knew it, it was after midnight and I was still sitting outside. I finished what I was watching and I decided to just sit outside and enjoy the air for a while until I went inside to sleep. Immediately after taking my headphones out, I noticed something strange from my balcony vantage point. I saw a sort of figure pacing back and forth outside of the apartment building behind me. I felt comfortable practically spying on this person since there was no way he could see me. I was dressed in all black on a third-floor balcony, slouched in a chair. I watched this pacing continue for roughly 5 minutes. I was trying to theorize what the person was doing. My first thought was that maybe they got locked out and they were pacing, waiting for someone to let them in. But that theory faded away quickly when I noticed how suspicious he looked when he stopped pacing. He started to look all around, like he was trying to be secretive. I could clearly make out some of his features once he started to look around too. He had a thick beard and was wearing an Atlanta Braves baseball cap. He had a hood on top of the hat, and I could see long hair protruding from the sides of the hood and hat. He slowly approached a sliding door, and it must have been locked because after a couple of attempts of trying to open it, he stopped and walked to another apartment. When he reached the next apartment, he went to grab the door and a car drove by. He jumped away from the door and pretended like he was walking down the road. Once the car was out of sight, he went back to the door and tried to open it again. And again, no luck. I felt a sense of relief when he started to walk away from the apartments. Whatever intentions he had, it seemed like he was abandoning them. I also felt relief lift off my shoulders because I was having an eternal battle on the inside on whether or not I should call the cops. I mean, of course I should have, but for some reason calling the cops was giving me crippling anxiety. I can't explain why, but the police terrify me, so I avoid that confrontation at all costs. Just as the relief was sitting in completely, the man turned back around and went back to the apartment that he was just at seconds ago. He didn't look around this time. He grabbed onto the sliding door and started to yank on it hard. Thankfully, his failure continued, and he gave up and went to the last apartment on the ground floor that was in my vision. He grabbed the door and, to my horror, it opened. He slowly opened it as if though he was trying to be quiet. I wanted to grab my phone and call the police, but I also didn't want to lose my focus on this guy. The lights were in the apartment, so I couldn't tell where he went once he went inside. And once he was inside, I lost sight, and I ran and grabbed my phone. It took everything I had, but I called the police and told them my suspicion. They said that they were going to send a car over right away. And I sat on the balcony and continued to watch the sliding door that he left slightly open. I saw a light turn into one of the windows of the apartment, and within seconds, I saw the man run out of the apartment at full speed toward my building. Even though I knew this man couldn't see me, I still slid down in my chair even more just because I was so tense. Before the man was even out of sight, a large shirtless man ran out of the sliding door with a baseball bat in hand to chase him. He only took a few steps before retreating into his apartment, closing the sliding door and standing in the window of the door with the bat in hand. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. I instantly felt guilty for not calling earlier, but then reassured myself that it could have potentially been much worse if I didn't call when I did. The cops finally showed up a few minutes later and were talking to the man. I was still watching from my balcony and I saw a woman joining the big man as well as 2 teenage children. Within just a couple of minutes, several more cops showed up. After a lot of conversations with the family, the cops finally left and eventually, the night was quiet again. I went to bed that night, terrified that someone was going to open my sliding door even though I was on the 3rd floor. I feared that my apartment was going to get broken into every night until I eventually just moved out. I still think about that night all the time. Even though it didn't directly involve me, sometimes being a fly on the wall and witnessing something horrible can be just as traumatic in other ways. At the end of the day, I was just happy I don't live anywhere near those apartments anymore, and that the family from the apartment was physically unharmed that night, although I can't imagine the psychological damage that family is still enduring today. If you enjoyed this scary story, listen to thousands more, either over on the Let's Read YouTube channel or podcast.